My name is Andrew Serafini, and I represent District 2A, which is located in Washington County in beautiful western Maryland. It is my privilege to offer a rebuttal of the Governor's State of the State address on behalf of the Republican members in the state legislature. First, let me say that we just concluded a lengthy and contentious presidential election season. Most Americans are tired of partisan politics and the divisiveness. In that light, I would like to offer not a rebuttal, but a different perspective, not a discussion of what is wrong, but what might be solutions for the future. As a financial planner for the last 25 years, I've had the privilege to work with thousands of Maryland families from all walks of life in reaching their financial goals. I've noticed that Maryland families have made tough choices through these difficult times, and they expect no less from their government. Over the last decade, the federal government has spent almost $1 trillion more than it collected in revenues annually. Our country now has a national debt of more than $16.5 trillion. Last year, that would have been like a family making $25,000 a year and spending $38,000. Since you and I cannot go to the basement and print money, we must live within our means, and so should our government. Maryland has been described as America in miniature. We reflect much of the wonder and diversity of our great country, but we also share its fiscal challenges. Our continued dependence on federal government for jobs and direct aid to our own budget is an unwise path for the future. Some estimate that almost 60 to 70% of Maryland's economy is driven by federal government spending. Probably your neighbor, family member, or you work directly for the government or a company that supports or relies on government spending. We know that over the next few months, Congress will be facing some tough choices and making cuts to the federal budget. Our over-reliance on federal spending will cause significant problems for Maryland's economy. Through these last 6 years of economic difficulty, Governor O'Malley has faced very difficult choices. While he pursued what is known as Keynesian economics, where government spending and borrowing are used to help stimulate a sluggish economy, my colleagues encouraged him to consider real spending cuts that would have been difficult for all, but would have solved many of our fiscal challenges. However, the leadership decided to fill shortfalls by taking funds from dedicated accounts such as the Transportation Trust Fund, Program Open Space, and even some of the stimulus money that we receive from the federal government, in addition to raising taxes. The current administration talks about cuts in spending since they began, but in reality, overall spending has increased 26%, while the median household income in Maryland has only increased by 4.9%. This type of budget growth is not sustainable and perpetuates the cycle of deficits and tax increases. The Republican members of the legislature will continue to work with the administration, giving them alternatives that slow the budget growth and resolve the state's budget deficit without raising taxes or fees on Marylanders still suffering from the effects of the recession. If things don't change, current projections show that over the next 5 years, we will need to find an extra $1 billion annually just for two issues: the general fund to pay for pension expenses and debt payments. Maryland's current and future pension obligations are estimated to be $54 billion. However, there's only $39 billion in the fund. That leaves us with a $15 billion shortfall. That's almost $7,000 for every Maryland household. This has been a result of some chronic underfunding, overestimation of investment returns, and making risky investments with pension dollars to cover shortfalls. If these actions are not corrected, the Maryland legislature will have to make significant cuts in programs and raise revenues through higher taxes and fees to meet these pension obligations. Changes of several years ago are clearly not the permanent fix that we thought. House Republicans are offering legislation that will address each of the problem areas. In addition, my fellow Republicans also support the creation of a 401k type retirement program option for all state employees. Should they make that choice, this only offered to University System Maryland employees currently. Also, since the counties are now paying a portion of the pension cost, Republicans will work to have county representatives on the Pension Oversight Board. While we certainly should be proud of the state's AAA rating, the amount of debt that we have accrued in recent years should cause some concern. The payments on our debt are funded with revenues from property taxes. Real estate values obviously have dropped significantly, and that means so have the revenues that help pay that debt service. Within the next 5 years, we could be $500 million short on an annual basis in the money that we need to pay for these bonds that we've already issued. Once again, what does that mean for you? You could be asked to pay as much as a 50% increase in the portion of real estate tax that goes to the state. Over the last several years, Annapolis has been using the state's credit card to stimulate the economy, and citizens will soon be getting the bill. Members of the Republican caucus are currently working on ideas to create a more business-friendly environment. We believe that a review of the corporate income tax and streamlining the regulations that slow, stymie, and completely frustrate businesses wanting to come to Maryland is warranted. This could attract businesses and private enterprise jobs for our citizens. Corporations can, and unfortunately have, moved out of Maryland to neighboring states with lower taxes and friendlier regulatory environments. Our country and state face quite a dilemma when we think about the events in Connecticut and the tragedies we've experienced over the last several years. We are committed to a bipartisan effort to attempt to ensure that what happened in Newtown never happens in Maryland or anywhere else in the United States. While we applaud Governor O'Malley for his quick and decisive action, there is nothing in the administration's proposal that would have prevented the tragedy in Connecticut. My Republican colleagues have proposed legislation that will make our schools safer and attempt to reduce gun violence. We believe this can be accomplished without limiting the Second Amendment rights guaranteed to our citizens in the United States Constitution. We also strongly believe a major emphasis should focus on the mental health issues associated with this violence. Unfortunately, many people are receiving psychiatric care in our correctional facilities instead of the mental health institutions that they should after they have harmed themselves or our fellow citizens. We must also recognize there are larger societal issues that legislation cannot fix. Once again this year, Maryland received the #1 rating in public education by Education Week. This ranking emphasizes how much money is spent in schools, but does not always fully evaluate the outcomes. Maryland does spend a large amount on education, but despite this large investment, many of our students are struggling to find work. Other graduates have had to take remedial college classes. We're not advocating for significant cuts in funding, but a request for a better return on the investment that we are making. House Republicans do agree with Senate President Mike Miller that finding a way to make improvements to our transportation infrastructure should be our priority for this session in 2013. However, we do disagree that imposing a gas tax is required to meet that goal. The Transportation Trust Fund has long served as the fiscal safety net needed to balance Governor O'Malley's budget. Much needed revenue for roads and bridges, raised primarily from existing motor vehicle fees and gas taxes, have been diverted to non-transportation related projects, as well as unprofitable investments in mass transit. 56% of the revenue raised for the trust fund comes from our motor vehicle fees and existing tax, but only 24% of the revenue is used on infrastructure, maintenance, and improvements, while 48% is directed towards mass transit. The reality is, we have enough money for infrastructure if we let the trust fund do what it was created to do. Republicans will be proposing a constitutional amendment to protect the Transportation Trust Fund from future raids, and will also introduce legislation mandating that borrowed funds be repaid to the counties. We are also looking for ways to make mass transit more profitable, such as an increase in the fare box recovery, so automobile drivers are not subsidizing so much of the system that they do not use. While we also agree with the governor that alternative energy resources are a worthwhile pursuit, we also know that offshore wind is the most expensive way to produce renewable energy. The governor's offshore wind proposal will cost Maryland electricity customers $4 billion over the next 20 to 25 years. We would like to see the governor pursue alternative energy sources that can already be found in Maryland, like our untapped natural gas reservoirs. In addition, we would like to see the governor follow President Obama's lead in embracing and expanding our nuclear facilities. We now know that a major goal for the O'Malley administration is also the repeal of the death penalty in Maryland. A total of just 5 men have been executed in the state in the past 32 years. 5 more remain on death row, 3 of whom have been there since 1983. These low numbers show that Maryland takes very seriously the burden of proof required to administer the death penalty. We believe that the death penalty is an effective and necessary tool for prosecutors and is warranted for the most heinous crimes. A major concern is for the safety of our law enforcement and correctional officers. They would be put in further danger by this legislation because they work with violent criminals who will not face the death penalty if they commit murder while in custody. It is important to remember that our passion comes from our strong commitment to our core Republican values and doing what's best for the citizens of Maryland. And though we may disagree with our Democrat colleagues about the road to take, the desired destination is the same. I hope and pray that current and future leaders will do everything they can to serve the citizens of this fine state. Thank you for this opportunity to offer a different point of view. I also pray that God will bless your family and you.